In today's IOB podcast, a fantastic interview with Jay Anxious. Great advice for podcasters. You're listening to the IOB Podcast. Our goal is to make you and your podcast the best. I'm super happy to have interviewed Jay Anxious from the Jay Anxious Podcast. He gives us gold. So much great advice. If you're going to be interviewing people on your podcast, you need to My dream for having my podcast was ... He talks about monetizing a podcast. He says the word interviewing is not the right word. He talks about how he gets his podcasts out there to the maximum audience. Jay says he does not have social media followers. Instead, Jay talks about his studio setup. Very minimal, but it works. Jay says don't use Skype. Don't use Zoom. So what should you use? Jay talks about podcasting to other formats, newsletters, video. And finally, Jay gives us the best. If you're going to do an interview show, this is the gold you need to do. So I'm really excited. Jay Anxious is here with us. Let's check out the interview. I'm here live with Jay Anxious, and I'm really happy to meet you, Jay. Jay, we need to know about you. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your podcast and what you're doing.
Well, I go by the anonymous name of Jay Anxious. My name is Jason Stitchin. I am a podcaster from Northeast Pennsylvania, father of two, married 10 years, all that good stuff. I was in sales for a while, but basically all I do is the online gig now, podcasting and things like that. Just enjoying it, just enjoying life.
And I'm assuming now, you said you were in sales. Sales is actually really effective for podcasters. I mean, having that type of background, I think, makes podcasting a little bit easier. Do you agree?
I agree with that 1,000,000%. Look, I don't think you could do anything without having a sales background in this new world of, being on the internet and trying to make a living through it. It's all about sales, developing your pitch, all of that kind of good stuff. And sales has helped me the most in podcasting by the best trait you could have as a salesperson is listening skills. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to be a podcaster who interviews people, the number one thing that you need to do is listen. Well, you have one of the questions up here for me, advice for podcasters out there. If you're going to be in the interview, part of podcasting, I highly suggest that you learn how to listen and don't cut off your guests, because people are not really there to listen to you. They're there to listen to the guests. So leave them go, and don't be thinking of your next question as they're speaking. Listen to what they have to say, digest it, and then come up with an intelligent question after that, or an intelligent rebuttal, or whatever it is you're having as the conversation.
Yeah, that I think is really important. I totally agree with that. And that's why I put my questions up here. They're 4 basic questions, but I figured as this podcast would go, we might tangent off into something. And once again, the sales is a great idea. I agree.
Oh, I think I know for sure we'll get into something else. That's what I like about it.
So Jay, when did you first start podcasting?
I started January 10th, 2021.
Oh, wow. And was it the Jay Anxious show, or was it a sales-related show?
All Jay Anxious Podcast.
So this is your one and only podcast, and
it's not. No, I have another. I do 2 podcasts.
Tell us.
My other podcast is a sports-related podcast. It's with my brother. It's called the Stitch 'Em Up Podcast.
So you do Stitch 'Em Up and Jay Anxious. Are these weekly podcasts? Is there a regular schedule to them?
Jay Anxious, there is no regular schedule to them. Sometimes I do 4 shows a week. Sometimes I do 1. Right now I'm doing 1.
Wow.
Stitch 'Em Up is weekly. Comes out on Sunday nights.
And you do that with your brother together?
Yes.
And it's all sports?
All sports, yeah. Mainly UFC and NFL. Some college football mixed in there, but we talk about other things, and it's more of a funny, bullshitty. I'm sorry. I don't know if it occurred to me. Okay. Yeah, like a bullshitty type bar scene type sports show. It's pretty interesting. It's funny. So
this is perfect because you're doing two. So I do a lot of podcasting too, but it's all me. Okay. And you're doing one where you're interviewing people, and you're doing another one with a guest and perhaps, well, actually your brother, a co-host, I should say. These are really different formats. And for somebody just starting off, is there a better format in your opinion? Does it matter on personality? Does it matter on the type of show you want to do?
I think it matters on the show that you want to do. Because I don't prefer either way. I just like to hear my voice on a microphone, to be honest with you. I like the banter that my brother and I could develop, and I also like just building a relationship with someone through an interview process. But I just have a lot of fun on the one with my brother and I, and then the one that I'm interviewing people is more of a serious vibe. But I've been trying to lighten it up lately, especially with some of the guests that I've had on. I don't know if you know Pixie from Next on Stage 1 podcast or not. I just had her on. Yes. She's awesome. She's so much fun. I highly suggest you guys, if you're into the podcasting world and you like podcasts, check out Pixie and Mr. J's podcast, Next on Stage 1. That's what it's called. It's about the adult entertainment industry, strippers, not pornography, but it's really good. Their stories are funny as hell. And check it out. It's definitely really, really good.
So the Jay Anxious podcast is basically gleaning lessons off of people. And what is it that are learning from people, learning about different, whatever it is that they do. What is the goal of that podcast? When you started out, what were you thinking?
When I started it out, I have lived with and dealt with and overcome some really serious anxiety, panic attack, ADHD problems over a 25-year period of my life. Now, I'm only 38, so that'll give you an idea of how much of my life was affected by that. And still am, and a major consumer of podcasting. And on one of my long runs that I like to do a couple of times a week, right before, in the Northeast, and you're from, the Midwest, the upper Midwest, that the winters come quick around here. So I was on one of my last runs. It was actually a decent weather week in the beginning of December of 2020. And I'm listening to the podcast, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I just said, shit, why don't you just do your own? Wow. And a month later, I was doing my own.
That's really cool. What were you listening to, or was it just that you were listening to podcasts? Was there anything special or something specific?
A good friend of mine, I don't know if you listen to him, he does two podcasts as well. One is called Peak Human Podcast, and another one is called Sapien Podcast. His name's Brian Sanders. Okay. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. Okay. His podcast really changed my life. Okay. Dialed me in on my diet, dialed me in on taking care of myself and things like that. And I thought, if Brian could dial it in like that with the diet, I want to mix all of the stuff, all of my experiences that I've been through, mix that in with the diet and the fitness part and money and everything, like bring it all together. And I don't know if you can see my banner behind us, but it just says freedom of life and general human betterment. And my show is about general human betterment. I completely made up them words, then just jump them together. But I just want to generally help people in as many different ways as I can. And like, I've had McNeil on, who's a big sports guy on my podcast. I've had people like Pixie on in my podcast. And I've also had people like Zeke Arkham on my podcast, and Hotep Jesus, and talk about politics and anything that you could think of. The show does have is rooted in anxiety and how to beat it, right? But in my opinion, there's so many ways that you have to develop yourself if you're really having a problem with anxiety. Anxiety is not a problem with you. It's a problem with your behavior and a problem with how you're living and just so many other different things. And what it is like, in my opinion, you will not find this in any textbooks, but anxiety is a mental disorder where you're constantly seeking comfort. Okay. So what I'm trying to do by this general human betterment is just try to break people out of their comfort zones. And I'm giving them so many different avenues to take to find one way out of their comfort zone. And I don't know, Mike, if you've listened to any of my shows, my Jay Anxious podcast yet or not.
I have.
Okay. I don't know if you heard me say on those podcasts that my dream to have the podcast was just to have one person reach out and say, you've helped me. And within my first 46 episodes, that has happened already. So I actually am going to next week work with Dr. Peter DeLima. He is at Peter DeLima PSY on Twitter. And I'm going to be doing a podcast with him, but I'm also going to be working with him and his wife through their organization in the UK to help teens and preteens with anxiety. So I'm very, very much looking forward to that.
That's incredible. That's great. So it's something, and this is so, I think, important for somebody who wants to start out podcasting, is there's got to be something in your life that is on your mind a lot, whether it's a hobby, whether it's a problem, whether it's a dream, whether it's a goal, whether it's work or something like that, something that actually kind of has a fire inside you. And you start channeling that through a podcast. And if that's a genuine fire, you're going to be lit. I mean, it's going to be magic. And that's exactly what you've been able to do. And then, so I'm assuming you started with Jay Anxious and then went to the sports. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I was about 30, 35 episodes in on Jay Anxious before we started Stitch 'em Up. Yeah.
And that was for fun?
It's all for fun. I don't make any money yet.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's
well,
beautiful.
I not off the podcast per se, but off the internet I make quite a bit. But yeah, but
that's great. So speaking of that, what do you think about monetizing podcasts? Of course, it's fine. I'm not saying, is it good or bad? But I'm talking about how soon should somebody be thinking about that? Because I think a lot of people, when they look at Joe Rogan, or some ridiculous person to look up to, great podcast, but and they think about, I can make some money, and you could, but a lot of people, it seems, really want to make that dime really fast. I want to know what you think about that.
Well, personally, I would say I have to admit that I have no idea what the answer to that question is. If you want to monetize a podcast, you better be famous. If you think you're going to monetize a podcast fast, and you don't know anybody who just wants to give you free money for putting yourself on a podcast, good luck. That isn't going to happen. You need a minimum of, I don't know, at least 500,000 downloads a month, and that's going to take a long, long time.
I totally agree. Those numbers are actually important in that specific area. Of course, there's going to be types of podcasts where maybe you have your own product or something is, maybe there is some sort of sponsorship. But I hear people suddenly they're starting off their podcast and then they say, today's podcast is brought to you by, some weird clothing company that has nothing to do with the podcast. And I'm like, I tell these guys, you might want to not do that, or kind of intertwine it more into the story that you're telling in your podcast. But
or interview the guy whose clothing line it is, if you actually know them. Have them as a guest. Yeah.
Yeah, then you can constantly plug that. The format of your show obviously is an interview format. The other one with your brother, it's you guys chatting about sports. Is there a structure? And when you started off podcasting, how much did you think about it before you started? And did you make a lot of tweaks as you went out along the way?
Okay, so here's more honesty from me. I've never thought about how to structure my podcast at all. I've never edited a second of my podcast except for a couple of mistakes, or when the internet has gone down and I've lost the person and we just had to pick up to where we left off. everybody who has listened to my podcast knows that, you know, I've had things fall. I've had my phone ring. I've had guest phone ring. I've had all kinds of nonsense happen during my shows. I don't edit it. I don't even think about designing a format for my show. For my show, that is. For my brothers and I, we do segment it a little bit and break it down into some different things, but there isn't a whole hell of a lot of thought put into it either. I don't think that's what podcasting is. If people look, I never listened to a podcasting for now. Look, all right. So let me slow down here a second. Let me back up. Your sound needs to be good, right? Your sound needs to be good, and I try to make that as good as I can. Outside of that, I don't think anybody's looking for any production value. And if you're putting a whole hell of a lot of production value in your podcast, I think you're missing the spirit of podcasting in general. If you want to listen to a well-produced program, go listen to the radio,
right?
Or go listen to, or go watch a YouTube video or something. But if you want to listen to somebody just pouring their thoughts and feelings or opinions onto a microphone and putting it out to the world, I think podcasting is the raw spoken word, and especially through conversation and interviewing with other people. I try not to say interviewing, Mike, because I don't like interviewing. I don't interview anybody. I have a conversation with people who I think know more about a specific subject than I do.
Right.
I take it as a learning experience. I don't take it as an interview. I ask some questions, but I don't think it's an interview. I think it's a flowing conversation because I have just as many questions asked to me during a podcast as I ask others. And I think that's really good. And I think that's why my podcast is really picking up some steam right now.
How are you getting your podcast out there? How are people finding you?
Social media.
And is it you? Are you having your guests promoted too? I assume there's no paid advertising or anything.
I do, when I'm having a bigger guest, I will throw a couple bucks in to market it a little bit. Facebook, believe it or not, is the best place to do that. But no, it's just me and of course my guests. I don't know if you've noticed, but my guests are significantly larger than I am on social media. I don't really even have much of a follower. Well, let me say this the right way, and I will thank my social media followers to the end of time. Because I have a following. I don't have followers. I don't have a large group of followers. I have a following, which I think is far more important. And there's a lot of people, and I've interviewed some of them, who have a lot of followers but do not have a following.
And what you mean,
difference.
What you mean, I assume, is the people who are following you are actually listening to you, interacting with you. They care about what you have to say. Is that right?
You're absolutely right. I have a group of about 700 and some people that I could count on to download my podcast every single time I put one out.
How did you do that? How did you build that? Now, obviously, when we listen to you, we can sense that you're genuinely genuine, but you're behind a mic and far away. How do you do that?
I'm consistent.
I mean, are you interacting with people online? Are you liking everything? Are you commenting?
All the time. Now, look, they don't do shit for me on social media, but it shows up. It shows up on the downloads. It shows up on the download.
Yeah, exactly.
I have some I'm not a bragger. I have some fans. Like I have people who really, really like my podcast, and I hear it from them through email. I hear it from them through direct messaging. But I have some fans, and I love them so much, and I can't thank them enough for how much support they give me.
And this doesn't include your mom.
My mom has never listened to a single one of my podcasts. Neither has my father.
I'm teasing. That's just fantastic. And what about your brother? What is his role other than as a co-host, I guess? Do you come into your house and do it? Is he at his house? How does that work? In
the Jay Anxious studio. Here we are. Yeah.
I love it. Tell us about your studio setup. You said sound is important. Don't think much about the format. Just kind of do it. But sound is important. Couldn't agree more.
Here is the $30 microphone that I do my podcast on. Here's the backup $35 microphone that's not as good as the $30 one. And here's my $2,700 computer. That's the mastermind behind it all. But, and if I showed you, there's actually a refrigerator right here, and all you have is my banner. I have no soundproofing whatsoever.
Right.
I just have a really decent acoustic corner of my basement where all the magic's made. Like, that's it.
But there's not much echo, which is really nice.
Yes. It is set up
lucky.
that way. Yeah, my cousin came down. My cousin's an AV guy. He's really, really good. And he's like, I think you'll have your best thing over here in the corner. So it's relatively quiet down here. You can't hear much ruckus upstairs. But this is it. Yeah, this is the Jay Anxious studio. I highly recommend Squadcast.
So, and I was going to ask you, that was my next question. When you are interviewing people, you're using Squadcast.
I am.
And can you tell us about that software?
Sure, Squadcast. Okay, so first and foremost, the reason why I don't use Skype or Zoom is because, I don't know, I'm sure you know this as well, but 95% of the magic of a podcast happens before and after it. The actual podcast is nowhere near as good as the pre-chat and the post-chat of a podcast. Okay, but Zoom and Skype are listening to you as you do that. Squadcast doesn't do that. Now, Squadcast does cost you a little bit of money. I think it's like $24, $25 a month, but well worth it in my opinion. Super easy to download the MP3 off of it. The video quality is really good if you want to do that as well. Just you come out of the podcast, you leave the software, you hit leave up in the right-hand corner, and it comes out, and you'll have two boxes. You click two boxes, you click mix audio, it mixes it for you, spits out an MP3, you load it into your directory, and you got a live podcast. It's that simple.
A lot of people, you know, they're writers. They like to write, so they make a blog or a newsletter or something. A lot of people they want to be on video. And then there are those of us who prefer to sit behind a mic. Do you have a plan to utilize all of those areas, or are you just going to stick with podcasting? Do you have a newsletter? Do you have a YouTube
I have a
channel?
newsletter. It's in my bio on my Twitter account. It's pretty good, I think. I get some pretty good responses from it. I'm working on something else, but yes, I am going to start using video maybe early next year. As soon as I get to like that 10 to 15,000 download per episode mark, I'm really going to start trying to expand into that realm, into getting a lot bigger. Video is something you really got to think about, in my opinion. I don't think you can just throw yourself up there, because there's a lot more to video than there is to just doing a podcast. And I've brought this up quite a few times, and people tell me that I disrespect other podcasters when I say that I don't do any editing and I don't do anything like that. They're like, oh, there's a craft. I said, the craft is to the spoken word. Nobody's ever said, hey, I'm not listening to your podcast anymore because it's not edited, or, I hear my tongue. I do the tongue click quite a bit. I'm trying to, focus on that a lot more than I have been in the past. I like to get the podcast out to the public within 2 hours of recording it. And the reason behind that is because the person who did the podcast with you, it's still very fresh in their mind.
It's showing respect too, isn't it?
It is, and I'm excited to get their voice and my voice out to the public as fast as I possibly can. They're more receptive to helping you market it when they see that that's that fast, the turnaround is, and that you respect their time. You don't want to. I know guys who have like 17 episodes downloaded, and they just throw them out every once in a while. I think, especially in this day and age, like, if you wait 2 months, your information is dead.
Yeah,
it's dead. Like it could be completely different in 2 months. So I try to get it out within 2 hours. This is the podcast game for you if you're going to be an interview show. I've had on 46 guests. I have like 35 more booked. Way out into September. I've asked over 3,000 people to be on my show.
Wow.
I'm like 70 of 3,000. You can't quit. If it means something to you, you can't quit. So don't expect everybody to say yes. But here's a tactic that I use that has worked a couple times. Hotep put out a tweet, and I immediately got in there. I wasn't first to respond to the tweet. I might have been in the top 10. And I just said, love your take on that. Whatever, I forget even what the tweet was. Would you come on my podcast and talk to me about it? He immediately followed me, then got in my DMs and said, here's my email address. Let's set it up. I almost fell off the freaking chair.
Absolute gold. So, Jay, we need to know your social media if people want to get in touch with you, if they have questions about exactly what that mic is or why the hell you spent $2,500 on a computer. What's your Twitter handle? What the YouTube channel? And, of course, the podcast names again.
I don't have a YouTube channel. I am at Jay Anxious everywhere. And on Facebook, I am at the Jay Anxious Podcast. Follow it if you don't mind on Facebook. And on Instagram and Twitter, I am just at Jay Anxious.
Thanks so much, Jay, for the gold, the podcast gold. My favorite parts were work on your following. If you're going to do an interviewing podcast, make sure you listen. Yeah, really, really great stuff. All the links to Jay's podcasts and everything else are in the description, so be sure to check that out. We're on iTunes finally, so we really would appreciate a review. Of course, 5 stars, thumbs up, whatever it is. It really helps. It helps us get our podcast out there. And if you want to retweet it and share it with your friends, that would be so excellent. I'd love to interview you if you have some great advice, great ideas for podcasters out there. If you have a question about anything regarding podcasting, podcast formatting, please let me know. Mike at introoutrobeds.com. That's my email address. And I have a special offer from our new newsletter that just went out today, actually. And the idea is if you are running ads in your podcast, you need to weave those ads into your podcast. Don't just drop bombs, make it work. So I'm giving some free advice if you want it. So please check out our newest newsletter. And again, that link will be in the description. TJ is ready to make an intro for you. Not only an intro, bed music, transitions, and outro. Get the full package at a great price. Send us an email, contact@introoutrobeds.com. What else do I need to tell you? Not too much, except keep podcasting, be consistent, enjoy your show. And if you want to get it critiqued, and possibly if we critique you, get a free intro from TJ, again, send us an email, contact@introoutrobed.com, or contact us on Twitter or Instagram, and that is @introoutrobed. Thanks so much, guys. I'll talk to you next time. This is Mike, and remember, we're here to help you make your podcast the best.